The bullet missed Natalie Lawson's head by inches, and instead of ducking, she whirled around with fire in her eyes, grabbed the nearest bottle from the saloon bar, and hurled it at the drunk cowhand who had fired the shot, catching him square in the forehead before anyone could blink. It was June of 1878 in Montana City, Montana Territory, and Natalie had just arrived 3 days prior on the dusty stagecoach from Denver, her meager belongings tied in a worn carpet bag, her heart heavy with the loss of her father to consumption and her mother years before that. She had come to this rough frontier town because her late father's letter had mentioned a distant cousin who owned a boarding house here, someone who might give her work and a place to stay. What she had not expected was to walk into the Silver Spur Saloon looking for directions and nearly get her head blown off by a man too drunk to know which way was up. The bottle shattered against the cowhand's skull, and he went down like a felled tree. The saloon fell silent, every eye turning to the young woman with auburn hair pinned up in a simple bun, her traveling dress dusty from the road, her green eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the hardest men take a step back. Anyone else want to take a shot at the new girl? Natalie demanded, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She had never thrown anything at another human being in her life, but months of pent-up grief and frustration had found an outlet in that moment. The bartender, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, let out a low whistle. "Miss, you just knocked out Randy Peterson. His brother ain't going to like that." "Then his brother should have taught him better manners," Natalie said, but her bravado was already fading as she realized what she had done. She had been in town 3 days and had already made enemies. Her temper, the one her father had always warned her about, had gotten the better of her again. Before anyone could respond, the saloon doors swung open and a tall figure stepped inside. The afternoon sunlight behind him cast him in silhouette for a moment, but as he moved into the dim interior, Natalie could see him clearly. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, eyes the color of a storm-swept sky, and a calm bearing that seemed at odds with the tension crackling through the room. He wore the typical garb of a working ranch hand: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips. But there was something different about him, something in the way he carried himself that suggested intelligence and perhaps education, beyond what most cowboys in these parts possessed. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "New girl just laid out Randy Peterson with a bottle," someone called from the back. The man's gaze found Natalie, and she felt herself bristle under his scrutiny. She lifted her chin, refusing to show the fear that was beginning to creep up her spine. Did he deserve it? The man asked, directing the question to the bartender, not to her. "Fired his gun off drunk as a skunk. Nearly hit her," the bartender admitted. The man nodded slowly, then walked over to where Randy Peterson lay groaning on the sawdust-covered floor. He nudged him with his boot, not gently. "Get up, Randy. Go sleep it off." 2 other men hurried forward to help Randy to his feet and half drag him toward the door. The man who had just arrived turned his attention fully to Natalie, and she found herself unable to look away from those gray eyes. "You new in town?" he asked. 3 days, Natalie said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. "I am looking for Mrs. Sarah Hadley. She runs a boarding house." "That would be 2 streets over, the white house with the green shutters." He paused, studying her. "You have quite an arm." "He nearly killed me," Natalie said defensively. "I am not criticizing. I am just saying not many women would have fought back like that." There was something that might have been approval in his voice, which surprised her. "I have a terrible temper," Natalie warned, the words coming out before she could stop them. It was what her father had always said, usually with a mixture of exasperation and affection. "I am trying to work on it, but sometimes it just gets away from me." To her astonishment, the man laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and rich, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Then we'll weather every storm as one," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to say to a woman he had just met. Natalie blinked, confused. "What?" He seemed to realize what he had said and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, though his smile did not fade. "Sorry. What I mean is, a temper like that needs someone steady to balance it out. I am Xander Blake. I work at the Double Bar Ranch just outside town, but I come into Montana City most days to help at the livery stable my uncle owns." "Natalie Lawson," she said, still trying to make sense of his strange comment about weathering storms together. They had just met. He could not possibly mean what it sounded like he meant. "Well, Miss Lawson, let me escort you to Mrs. Hadley's boarding house. The streets can be rough this time of day, and you have already made one enemy today. Best not to make any more." Xander offered his arm in a gesture that seemed almost courtly, out of place in this rough saloon. Natalie hesitated, then accepted his arm. Her carpetbag sat near the door where she had dropped it when she had first walked in, and Xander picked it up without asking, carrying it as if it weighed nothing. They stepped out into the dusty street, and Natalie took a deep breath of the hot June air. Montana City was not a large town, but it was bustling with activity. Wagons rolled past, their wheels kicking up dust. Men on horseback moved through the street, and women in simple dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks, their bonnets protecting them from the intense sun. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat, and Natalie felt a pang of loneliness so sharp it nearly took her breath away. "You all right?" Xander asked, and she realized he was watching her with concern. "Just tired," she lied. "It has been a long journey." "Where did you come from?" "Denver originally, but before that, St. Louis. My father and I moved around a lot after my mother died. He was always chasing opportunities that never quite panned out." She did not know why she was telling this stranger her life story, but there was something about his calm presence that invited confidences. "And where is your father now?" Xander asked gently. "Dead. 2 months ago. Consumption." The words still tasted bitter in her mouth. "He left me with just enough money for the stage-coach ticket here, and a letter saying I might find help from Sarah Hadley, who was apparently my mother's second cousin or some such relation." "I am sorry," Xander said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That is a hard thing, to lose your parents so young. You cannot be more than, what, 20? 21 this past April," Natalie said. "And you?" 25. Been in Montana territory for 3 years now, working at the Double Bar for most of that time. Before that, I was back east, trying to make something of myself in Boston." He made a face. "Turns out I am not much for city life. Too many rules and expectations. Out here, a man can be judged by his work and his word, not by his family name or his bank account." They had reached the White House with green shutters, and Natalie felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. What if this Sarah Hadley wanted nothing to do with her? What if her father had been wrong about finding help here? Xander must have sensed her hesitation because he said, "Mrs. Hadley is a good woman. Lost her husband in a mining accident 5 years back and has been running this boarding house ever since. She will treat you fair." He walked her up the steps to the front porch and knocked on the door. A moment later, it opened to reveal a woman in her early 50s with graying brown hair and kind eyes. She looked from Xander to Natalie with curiosity. "Mrs. Hadley, this is Miss Natalie Lawson. She is looking for you," Xander said, Recognition flickered in the older woman's eyes. "Natalie Lawson. You would not be Margaret Lawson's daughter, would you?" "Yes, madam," Natalie said, relief flooding through her. "My father wrote to you a few months back." "Oh, my dear child, yes, I received his letter, but I wrote back saying you were welcome here. Did you not get my reply?" Mrs. Hadley ushered them both inside, into a clean, neat parlor that smelled of lemon oil and baking bread. "No, madam. My father died shortly after sending that letter. I did not know about your response until just now." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough over the past 2 months. Mrs. Hadley's face softened with sympathy. "I am so sorry, dear. Your mother was such a sweet girl when we were young. I only met your father once at their wedding, but he seemed like a good man." She turned to Xander. "Thank you for bringing her here safely, Xander. Would you like some coffee before you go?" "No, thank you, madam. I should get back to the livery." He set Natalie's carpetbag down and tipped his hat to both women. "Miss Lawson, I hope to see you around town." "Thank you for your help, Mr. Blake," Natalie said, meaning it. His gray eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and she felt something flutter in her chest, something she could not quite name. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and she was alone with Mrs. Hadley. "Now then," the older woman said briskly, though her eyes were still warm. "Let me show you to your room. You will stay here as long as you need, and in exchange you can help me with the cooking and cleaning. I have 4 other boarders, all working men, and they need 3 meals a day." "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My father was not much good in the kitchen, so I learned young." "Good, we will get along just fine then." Mrs. Hadley led her up a narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, down a short hallway, and into a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the street. "It is not much, but it is yours." "It is perfect," Natalie said honestly. After weeks of uncertainty and fear about her future, having a room of her own and a purpose felt like a miracle. That evening, she helped Mrs. Hadley prepare supper for the boarders: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. The 4 men who lived in the house were all polite and hardworking, employed at various businesses around town. They ate their meal with appreciation and did not ask too many questions, for which Natalie was grateful. She was exhausted, and her mind kept drifting back to the strange encounter in the saloon and the even stranger words Xander Blake had spoken. "Then we'll weather every storm as one." What had he meant by that? And why could she not stop thinking about the way his eyes had crinkled when he laughed? Over the next few days, Natalie settled into a routine at the boarding house. She woke early to help Mrs. Hadley prepare breakfast, then cleaned the rooms after the boarders left for work. In the afternoons, she helped with laundry, mending, and preparing the evening meal. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and it kept her mind off the grief that still sat heavy in her chest. On the 4th day after her arrival, Mrs. Hadley sent her into town to purchase supplies from the general store. Natalie tied on her bonnet, took the shopping list and the money Mrs. Hadley provided, and set off down the dusty street. The sun was hot, and she was grateful for the shade provided by the wooden awnings that stretched over the sidewalks. The general store was a treasure trove of goods. Bolts of fabric, farming tools, barrels of flour and sugar, canned goods, and sundries of every description. Natalie was examining a display of ribbons, thinking she might buy a bit of blue ribbon with the few coins she had saved from her journey, when she heard a familiar voice behind her, buying something pretty. She turned to find Xander Blake standing there, his hat in his hands, his hair slightly mussed as if he had been working hard. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. Just looking, Natalie said, feeling her cheeks warm for some reason. I am here to buy supplies for Mrs. Hadley. And how are you finding life at the boarding house? It is good. Mrs. Hadley is very kind. Natalie turned back to the ribbons, trying to focus on them instead of on the way her heart had started beating faster when Xander appeared. What brings you to the general store? Uncle needed some nails for the livery, and I needed a new bandana. Lost mine somewhere between here and the ranch. He moved closer to examine the ribbons. The blue one would look nice with your eyes. Natalie felt her temper flare at what she perceived as presumption. I did not ask for your opinion, Mr. Blake. Instead of being offended, he grinned. There is that temper. I was wondering if it had been a fluke in the saloon. It was not a fluke, Natalie said through gritted teeth. I have had this temper my whole life, and it has caused me nothing but trouble. A passionate nature is not always a bad thing, Xander said, his tone turning more serious. Means you care deeply about things. That is rare. Natalie did not know what to say to that. No one had ever framed her temper as something that might have a positive side. Her father had loved her despite it, and her mother, in the few memories Natalie retained, had always seemed worried by it. I should finish my shopping, she said, picking up the basket Mrs. Hadley had given her. Let me help you, Xander offered. It will go faster with two. They spent the next 20 minutes gathering the items on Mrs. Hadley's list: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, a tin of baking powder, and a slab of bacon from the store's cold room. The store owner, a portly man named Mr. Jennings, wrapped everything carefully and tallied the cost. Natalie paid with the money Mrs. Hadley had given her, and was pleased to find she had a few cents left over, which she carefully tucked into her pocket. Xander insisted on carrying the heavier items back to the boarding house, and Natalie did not argue. The sun had grown even hotter, and the weight of the flour sack would have been difficult to manage in the heat. As they walked, Xander told her about life at the Double Bar Ranch, how he had started as a simple ranch hand but had worked his way up to foreman over the past 3 years through hard work and dedication. The ranch owner, a man named Samuel Cartwright, was fair but demanded excellence from his employees. Xander spoke about the cattle drives, the long hours, the satisfaction of working with horses, and seeing the results of his labor in the thriving herd. Natalie found herself relaxing as she listened to his deep voice, the way he described the land with genuine affection. It was clear he loved this rough, beautiful territory. What about you? Xander asked as they approached the boarding house. What did you do before you came here? Helped my father with whatever work he could find. He was not always in the best of health, even before the consumption took hold. I cooked, cleaned, took in sewing and laundry to earn extra money. She paused. It was not much of a life, but it was ours. Sounds like you have been taking care of others for a long time, Xander observed. Who takes care of you? The question caught her off guard, and she felt tears threaten again. I do not need taking care of. Everyone needs someone, Xander said quietly. They had reached the boarding house steps, and he set down the supplies. Even folks with terrible tempers. You are making fun of me, Natalie accused. I am not, he said, and his gray eyes were serious. I meant what I said in the saloon, Natalie. I know it sounded strange, and I probably should not have said it, but there is something about you. Something that makes me think we could be good for each other. You have fire and I have patience. You challenge and I steady. It could work. Natalie stared at him, her heart pounding. You do not even know me. Then let me get to know you, Xander said simply. Let me court you properly. I will come calling if Mrs. Hadley permits it, and we will see where this leads. You are insane, Natalie said, but there was no heat in her words. We have known each other less than a week. Sometimes that is all it takes, My parents knew each other 3 days before my father proposed. They were married 40 years before he died. Xander's smile was gentle. I am not proposing, Natalie. I am just asking for a chance. She should say no. It was too fast, too impulsive, and she had enough upheaval in her life already. But when she looked at Xander Blake, at his honest face and his steady gaze, she found herself wanting to say yes, wanting to see where this strange, unexpected connection might lead. One chance, she said finally. But if you waste it, there will not be another. I will not waste it, Xander promised. He picked up the supplies again. Now let me help you get these inside before the butter melts in this heat. Mrs. Hadley was delighted when Xander asked permission to court Natalie. That boy is one of the finest young men in this territory, she told Natalie later, when they were alone in the kitchen preparing supper. Comes from good people back east, though he does not talk about them much. Works hard, treats everyone with respect, and he is not a drinker or a gambler. You could do far worse. I barely know him, Natalie protested, but she felt a flutter of excitement despite her reservations. Then get to know him, Mrs. Hadley said practically. But do not close yourself off to the possibility just because you are scared. Life is too short and too hard out here to turn away something good when it comes along. That evening, Xander came calling after supper. He sat with Natalie on the front porch, and they talked as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He told her about growing up in Boston, the son of a wealthy merchant, how he had felt stifled by the expectations and social niceties of that life. When he was 22, he had packed a bag and headed west, determined to make his own way without his family's money or influence. Do you ever miss it? Natalie asked. The comfort of that life? Sometimes, Xander admitted, but I do not miss the falseness of it. People smiled to your face and plotted behind your back. Everything was about status and money. Out here, things are simpler. A man is judged by what he does, not who his father is. And your family, do they understand? My mother does, I think. My father does not. He wanted me to take over his business to carry on the family legacy. My younger brother will do that now. Xander was quiet for a moment. We still write occasionally, but it is not the same. I made my choice, and I have to live with it. Natalie understood that kind of choice, that kind of separation from the life one had known. She told him about her childhood, moving from city to city, her father always chasing the next opportunity, the next promise of prosperity that never quite materialized. She told him about her mother's death when Natalie was only 8, from fever that came on fast and left even faster, taking her mother with it. She told him about the years of just her and her father, scraping by, surviving but not truly living. He did his best, Natalie said, staring out at the darkening street. I know he did, but I was angry with him sometimes for not being able to give us a better life. I would lose my temper over small things, and he would just look at me with such sadness, and I would feel terrible. Her voice broke. The last thing I said to him before he died was that I was angry he was leaving me alone. I did not even tell him I loved him. Xander reached over and took her hand, his warm fingers closing around hers. He knew, he said quietly. Parents always know, and he understood. You were scared and hurting, and you lashed out. That is what people do when they are in pain. How do you always know the right thing to say? Natalie asked, wiping at her eyes with her free hand. I do not, Xander said honestly. Most of the time I am just guessing. But I do know what it is like to feel guilty about the past, about choices made and words said. My last conversation with my father was a fight about my decision to leave. He said I was throwing away my future. I said he did not understand what I needed. We have not spoken since, only written stiff, formal letters a few times a year. He squeezed her hand. All we can do is try to do better going forward." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, and Natalie marveled at how easy it was to be with him. She had expected courting to be awkward and formal, full of stilted conversation and uncomfortable pauses, but this felt natural. Over the following weeks, Xander came calling every evening he could. Sometimes they sat on the porch and talked. Other times they took walks around town, Xander pointing out landmarks and introducing her to people. He took her to see the livery stable his uncle owned, a large building that smelled of hay and horses and leather. His uncle, a cheerful man named Thomas Blake, welcomed her warmly and made jokes about his nephew finally finding someone who could keep up with him. One Saturday afternoon, in late July, Xander borrowed a wagon and took Natalie out to see the countryside. They drove out past the last of the houses and into the open land, where grass stretched to the horizon and the mountains rose majestic and blue in the distance. Wildflowers dotted the fields, purple lupine, yellow balsam root, and white daisies. Xander spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree near a creek, and they ate the picnic lunch Mrs. Hadley had packed for them. Fried chicken, fresh bread with butter, cheese and blackberry preserves, and 2 slices of rhubarb pie. "This is beautiful," Natalie said, lying back on the blanket and staring up at the sky through the leaves. "I did not know Montana Territory was so beautiful." "Wait until winter," Xander said, lying beside her. "The snow on the mountains is something to see. Of course, it is also cold enough to freeze your eyelashes shut, but the beauty makes up for it." Natalie laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she started laughing so easily? When had the weight of grief begun to lift just a little? "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For being patient with me, for not running when I warned you about my temper." She turned her head to look at him. "I have not been the easiest person to court." "You have been perfect," Xander said, meeting her gaze. "Yes, you have a temper. Yes, you get frustrated easily sometimes. But you also care deeply, feel strongly, and live honestly. I would not change anything about you. Even when I threw a fit because you were 10 minutes late last Thursday. Even then," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Though I did explain that one of the horses had thrown a shoe and I had to help my uncle reshoe it." "I know. I was being unreasonable," Natalie sighed. "My father used to say I inherited my mother's passion and his stubbornness, and it was a dangerous combination." "Maybe," Xander said. "Or maybe it just means you know what you want and you are not afraid to fight for it. That is not a bad thing, Natalie. Not out here, where life is hard and every day is a battle against something, weather or distance or just plain loneliness." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and Natalie felt her breath catch. They had held hands, but he had not tried to kiss her yet, and she found herself both disappointed and relieved. Everything was moving so fast already, and part of her wanted to slow down, to make sure this was real and not just a reaction to the upheaval in her life. But another part of her, the passionate part her father had always worried about, wanted to close the distance between them and see if his lips were as gentle as his hands. "What are you thinking?" Xander asked softly. "That I want you to kiss me," Natalie said, then immediately felt her cheeks flame. "I should not have said that. It is not proper." "Proper is overrated," Xander said, but he did not move immediately. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Natalie whispered. And then his hand was cupping her cheek and he was leaning in and his lips were touching hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, as if he were afraid she might break or bolt. But when Natalie pressed closer, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beat fast under her palm, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like she had imagined kissing would be. It was better. It was terrifying and exhilarating and felt like coming home all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Natalie Lawson," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon to say that, and I know it probably scares you, but I have never been good at hiding what I feel. I am falling in love with your temper and your passion, and the way you tackle everything in life head-on. I am falling in love with your kindness to Mrs. Hadley and the way you laugh when you do not think anyone is listening. I am falling in love with all of you, and I just needed you to know." Natalie felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for once, they were not tears of grief. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me. I have lost everyone I have ever loved, and the thought of losing you two is almost unbearable, but I cannot seem to stop myself. You make me want to be brave." "Then be brave with me," Xander said. "We will be brave together." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, talking and kissing and making plans. Xander wanted to marry her, he said, but he wanted to do it right. He wanted to save enough money to buy them a small house in town, or maybe a piece of land where they could build. He wanted to be able to support her, to give her the security she had never had. "I do not need a big house," Natalie said. "I just need you." "You will have both," Xander promised. "Give me 6 months to save up. By Christmas, I will have enough to make a real start for us." 6 months seemed like forever, but Natalie agreed. She was willing to wait if it meant building something solid with him, something that would last. August rolled into September, and the weather began to cool. The boarders at Mrs. Hadley's house came and went, and Natalie learned the rhythms of the town. She made friends with some of the other young women, attended church on Sundays with Mrs. Hadley, and continued to see Xander every chance she got. But not everything was easy. In early September, Randy Peterson, the man Natalie had hit with the bottle back in June, cornered her in the alley behind the general store. He was drunk again, and his brother was with him, a larger, meaner version of Randy named Cole. "Think you can hit me and get away with it?" Randy snarled, grabbing Natalie's arm hard enough to bruise. "Let go of me," Natalie demanded, her temper flaring hot and fast. She tried to pull away, but Randy held firm. "Not until you apologize," he said, his breath reeking of whiskey. "I will do no such thing. You nearly shot me." Natalie drew back her free hand to slap him, but Cole caught her wrist. "Feisty little thing, is not she?" Cole said with a nasty grin. "Maybe we should teach her some manners." Fear cut through Natalie's anger. There was no one else in the alley, and these 2 men clearly meant her harm. She opened her mouth to scream, but before she could make a sound, a familiar voice rang out. "Let her go. Now." Xander stood at the mouth of the alley, and his face was harder than Natalie had ever seen it. His hand rested casually on the gun at his hip, and there was a dangerous glint in his gray eyes. "This is not your business, Blake," Cole said, but he released Natalie's wrist. "Anything involving Natalie is my business," Xander said, his voice cold. "She is my intended. So unless you two want to explain to the sheriff why you were manhandling my future wife, I suggest you walk away right now." Randy released Natalie's other arm, and she stumbled backward, rubbing at the sore spots. Randy and Cole exchanged glances, then seemed to decide that whatever they had planned was not worth getting shot over. They slouched past Xander, muttering curses under their breath. When they were gone, Xander was at Natalie's side in an instant. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "Just my arm. I will bruise, but I am fine." Natalie was shaking, the aftermath of fear and anger making her knees weak. "How did you know I was here?" "I saw you come into the alley and then saw those 2 follow you. I did not like the look of it." Xander's jaw was tight. "They will not bother you again. I will make sure of it." You called me your intended, Natalie said, focusing on that instead of on how scared she had been. You called me your future wife. Xander's expression softened. I did. Is that all right? More than all right, Natalie said, and she threw her arms around his neck, holding on tight. He held her just as tightly, his face buried in her hair, and she felt the tension slowly drain out of both of them. I meant it, he said quietly. I know I said I would wait until Christmas to make it official, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Natalie. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making sure you are safe and loved and never alone again. Yes, Natalie said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in late September of 1878 in the small church in Montana City with Mrs. Hadley and Xander's Uncle Thomas as witnesses. Natalie wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin that Mrs. Hadley had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers. Xander wore his best shirt and a new vest, and when he saw Natalie walking toward him down the short aisle, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her eyes fill with tears. The ceremony was brief and simple. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Xander he could kiss his bride, Xander cupped Natalie's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that she forgot anyone else was in the room. There was a small celebration afterward at the boarding house. Mrs. Hadley had made a cake, and some of the townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations. Xander's uncle gave them a generous sum of money as a wedding gift, telling them it was enough for a down payment on a house. Samuel Cartwright, the owner of the Double Bar Ranch, came into town to give his congratulations and offered Xander a raise in pay and a small house on the ranch property where they could live rent-free while they saved for their own place. You have been a good foreman, Mr. Cartwright said, shaking Xander's hand. And I do not want to lose you just because you are getting married. The house is not much, just 2 rooms, but it is solid and it has a good stove. My wife will be by with some supplies to get you started. Natalie thanked him profusely, overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had been strangers just a few months ago. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, the one luxury they allowed themselves. In the morning, they would load Natalie's few belongings into a wagon and head out to the Double Bar Ranch, to their new home and their new life together. As Natalie lay in Xander's arms that night, listening to his heartbeat under her ear, she felt a peace she had not known since before her mother died. She had been so angry for so long, at the world, at fate, at her own powerlessness. But Xander had shown her that her passion did not have to be destructive. It could build as well as burn. What are you thinking? Xander asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. That I am happy, Natalie said simply. That I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am. Good, Xander said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That is all I want, your happiness. And yours, Natalie said. I want you to be happy too. I am, Xander assured her, happier than I have ever been. The house on the Double Bar Ranch was indeed small, just 2 rooms. A main room that served as kitchen, dining area and living space, and a bedroom barely large enough for the bed and a wardrobe. But it was clean and solid, and Mrs. Cartwright was as good as her husband's word, arriving the day after they moved in with a wagon full of supplies. Dishes, pots and pans, linens, quilts, and enough food to stock their pantry for a month. Welcome to the Double Bar family, Mrs. Cartwright said warmly. She was a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and capable hands. If you need anything, you just let me know. It can be lonely out here for a woman, so please do not hesitate to come up to the main house for tea or just to talk." Natalie thanked her, grateful for the offer of friendship. Mrs. Cartwright was right. It was lonely. The ranch was several miles from Montana City, and the nearest neighbors were the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, none of whom were married. Xander left early each morning to work with the cattle and horses, and sometimes he did not return until after dark. Natalie filled her days with cleaning, cooking, mending Xander's clothes, and trying to make their little house feel like a home, but the loneliness wore on her. She missed Mrs. Hadley's cheerful chatter and the bustle of the boarding house. She missed having people around, and when Xander came home exhausted and often too tired for much conversation, Natalie felt her temper beginning to simmer again. It came to a head one evening in late October. Xander had been gone since before dawn, working on repairing fence lines in the far pasture. He came home well after dark, ate the dinner Natalie had kept warm for him in near silence, then announced he needed to go to bed because he had to be up even earlier the next morning. "That is it?" Natalie demanded, her voice sharp. "You are home for all of an hour, and half of that you spend eating. What about me? What about talking to me, spending time with me?" "Natalie, I am exhausted," Xander said, and she could hear the weariness in his voice. "Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "No, we cannot talk about it tomorrow because you will be gone tomorrow and the day after and the day after that." Natalie felt her temper spiraling out of control, but could not seem to stop it. "I am alone all day, every day. I talk to no one except you, and half the time you are too tired to even listen. What is the point of being married if I am going to be lonely anyway?" "That is not fair," Xander said, and now there was an edge to his voice too. "You knew I was a ranch foreman when you married me. You knew the work was hard and the hours were long." "I knew, but I did not know it would be like this," Natalie shouted. "I did not know I would feel like I traded one kind of loneliness for another." They stared at each other across the small room, both breathing hard, both angry and hurt. Natalie waited for Xander to shout back to match her anger with his own, but instead he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "You are right," he said quietly when he opened his eyes again. "You are right. I have been so focused on the work, on proving myself, on saving money for our future, that I have forgotten about our present. I am sorry." Natalie felt her anger deflate as quickly as it had risen, leaving her feeling hollow and ashamed. "I am sorry too. I should not have shouted at you. You are working so hard to provide for us, and I just yelled at you for it. I warned you I had a terrible temper, and you are seeing it now." Xander crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "And I told you we would weather every storm as one, remember? That means when you are angry, we talk about it. When I am exhausted, I still make time for you. We figure this out together." "How?" Natalie asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "How do we fix this?" "I will talk to Mr. Cartwright about adjusting my hours. Maybe I can work a bit less during the week and make it up on Saturdays. And on Sundays, we will make sure we have time together, just the two of us. No work, no chores, just us." He pulled back to look at her. "And maybe you should spend more time in town, visit Mrs. Hadley. Make friends with some of the other wives. You do not have to stay out here all the time." "I do not want to leave you alone either," Natalie said. "I will be fine. I have the other hands to talk to during the day. You need more than just me. That is not a failing, Natalie. That is just being human." They talked late into the night, working through their first real argument as a married couple. It was hard and uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. By the time they finally went to bed, exhausted but no longer angry, Natalie felt like they had turned a corner. They had faced a storm, and they had weathered it together. True to his word, Xander spoke to Mr. Cartwright the next day, and his employer agreed to a slightly modified schedule that would allow Xander to be home at a reasonable hour most evenings. And twice a week, Natalie began taking the ranch wagon into town to spend the afternoon with Mrs. Hadley or to shop or simply to be around people. The adjustments helped, and as the weeks passed, Natalie felt herself settling more comfortably into her new life. She and Mrs. Cartwright became friends, and Natalie would often walk up to the main house for tea and conversation. Mrs. Cartwright was intelligent and well-read, and she lent Natalie books from her extensive library, which helped fill the long hours when Xander was working. By December, a light snow was falling on the ranch, and Natalie stood at the window of their little house, watching the flakes drift down. Xander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Beautiful, is not it?" he murmured. "Yes," Natalie agreed. "I never thought I would love winter, but there is something magical about the snow." "I have something for you," Xander said, and he pulled a small package from his pocket. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Natalie opened it carefully to find a delicate silver locket. She opened the locket and found a tiny photograph of Xander on one side, though she had no idea when or where he had gotten it taken. "The other side is for a picture of you," Xander explained. "We will go into town after the new year and have your photograph taken at the photographer's studio. That way we can carry each other with us always." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes as she turned to kiss him. "It is perfect, thank you." "I love you," Xander said, fastening the locket around her neck. "I love your temper and your passion and your fire. I love that you challenge me and push me and make me want to be better. I love you, Natalie Blake." "I love you too," Natalie whispered. "More than I ever thought possible." Christmas was quiet and perfect. They spent it alone in their little house, eating a roasted chicken that Natalie had prepared and exchanging small gifts. Natalie gave Xander a new hat she had bought in town and a scarf she had knitted herself during the long afternoons. He gave her the locket and a beautiful shawl of soft blue wool. They talked about the future, about their dreams. Xander wanted to save enough money to buy their own small ranch someday, nothing as large as the double bar, but enough land for a few horses and cattle and a garden. Natalie wanted a real house with multiple rooms, enough space for children when they came. "How many children do you want?" Xander asked, his hand resting on her stomach as they lay in bed that night. "At least 3, Natalie said. "Maybe 4. I was an only child and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings to play with, to fight with, to love." 3 or 4 sounds perfect, Xander agreed. "Though I hope they do not all inherit your temper, or we will never have a moment's peace." Natalie elbowed him lightly. "They could inherit your stubbornness." "You are just as stubborn as I am, you just hide it better." "I prefer to think of it as persistence," Xander said with a laugh. Winter deepened, and life on the ranch took on a different rhythm. The days were shorter, the work different. There was less cattle work and more focus on maintaining buildings and equipment, preparing for the spring. Xander was home more, and Natalie cherished the long evenings they spent together, reading by the fire or simply talking. In February, Natalie realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, afraid to hope, but when they still did not come, she allowed herself to believe. She was pregnant. They were going to have a baby. She told Xander that evening as they sat by the fire. He was reading a book about horse breeding that Mr. Cartwright had lent him, and Natalie was mending one of his shirts. She set down her sewing and said, "Xander, I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine, better than fine." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Xander just stared at her, Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he was across the room in 2 strides, picking her up and spinning her around. "Truly. We are going to have a baby, truly," Natalie confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "I think it will be born sometime in October." "October," Xander repeated, setting her down gently as if she might break. "That is perfect. The work will have slowed down by then. I will be able to help you more." He cupped her face in his hands. "We are going to be parents. You are going to be a mother." "And you are going to be a father," Natalie said, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "A wonderful father, I know it." They celebrated with tears and kisses and whispered plans for the future. They would need to make more space in their little house for the baby. They would need to save money for a cradle and baby clothes and all the other things a child required. But they would manage. They would figure it out together. The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and there were days when she could barely keep anything down. Mrs. Cartwright was a godsend, bringing ginger tea and crackers and advice based on her own experiences with her 4 children. Xander was endlessly patient, holding Natalie when she was sick, rubbing her feet when they swelled, reading to her on the days when she was too tired to do anything but rest. As her belly grew round with their child, Natalie felt a joy she had not known was possible. Yes, her temper still flared sometimes. Yes, she still got frustrated with the limitations of their life. But she also felt a deep contentment, a sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In early October, 2 weeks before the baby was due, Natalie woke in the middle of the night with sharp pains in her back. At first, she thought she had just slept wrong, but then the pains came again, regular and insistent, and she realized what was happening. "Xander," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Xander, wake up. The baby is coming." Xander was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his clothes. "I will go get Mrs. Cartwright and send one of the hands for the doctor in town." "The doctor might not get here in time," Natalie said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Mrs. Cartwright will have to do." "She has delivered plenty of babies," Xander said, though his own voice was tight with worry. "She will know what to do." He kissed Natalie quickly. "I will be right back. Do not have this baby without me." "I will try," Natalie said, managing a weak smile. True to his word, Xander was back within 15 minutes with Mrs. Cartwright, who carried a bag of supplies and an air of calm competence. She shooed Xander out of the bedroom, telling him to boil water and fetch clean linens, then turned her attention to Natalie. "How far apart are the pains?" she asked, helping Natalie into a clean nightgown. "Maybe 10 minutes. Natalie was not entirely sure. Everything felt like a blur of pain and fear and anticipation. "You have time yet," Mrs. Cartwright said reassuringly. "First babies usually take a while. Let me examine you and see where we are." The hours that followed were the longest and most difficult of Natalie's life. The pains came harder and closer together, and despite Mrs. Cartwright's encouraging words, Natalie was terrified. What if something went wrong? What if she or the baby did not survive? She had heard stories about women who died in childbirth, about babies who came into the world only to leave it minutes later. But Mrs. Cartwright was experienced and calm, and Xander, though banished from the bedroom, stayed close, calling encouragement through the door and holding Natalie's hand during the worst of the contractions. Finally, as the sun was rising on October 15, 1879, Natalie gave one final, agonizing push, and then there was a sound that made her heart stop and start again. The lusty cry of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Mrs. Cartwright announced, wrapping the squirming infant in a clean blanket. A healthy, beautiful boy. She placed the baby on Natalie's chest, and Natalie looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and his dark hair and his perfect little fingers. She felt a love so fierce it nearly overwhelmed her, a love she had not known she was capable of feeling. "Xander," she called, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Come meet your son." The door opened, and Xander came in, his face pale and his hands shaking. When he saw the baby, when he reached out a tentative finger and the infant grasped it with surprising strength, Xander's face crumpled and he began to cry. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. You did this. You are amazing." "We did this," Natalie corrected. "Together." They named him Daniel, after Xander's grandfather, and Marcus, after Natalie's father. Daniel Marcus Blake came into the world with a full head of dark hair and gray eyes like his father, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he owned his parents' hearts completely. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Daniel was a good baby, mostly, but he had a temper when he was hungry or tired, and Natalie recognized it as her own. She would rock him and sing to him and soothe him when he cried, and Xander would pace the floor with his son on his shoulder, talking to him in a low, calming voice. "He has your temper," Xander observed one night as they both tried to calm a fussy Daniel. "And your stubbornness," Natalie shot back, but there was no heat in her words, only exhaustion and love. "He is perfect," Xander said, kissing the top of Daniel's downy head. Just like his mother, as Daniel grew, so did their lives. Xander's hard work and dedication at the Double Bar Ranch paid off when Mr. Cartwright offered to sell him a small parcel of land on the edge of the ranch property, at a price Xander could afford with the money he had saved. It was only 20 acres, but it was theirs, and Xander began building them a house in his spare time. It took 2 years, with help from Xander's Uncle Thomas and some of the other ranch hands, but by the fall of 1881, the house was finished. It was small but solid, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor with a fireplace. There was a barn for the 2 horses Xander had bought and a chicken coop for the hens Natalie wanted. They moved into their new home just before Christmas, and Natalie cried as she walked through the rooms, touching the walls Xander had built with his own hands, imagining the life they would live here. Daniel was 2 years old now, a sturdy, adventurous child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. He toddled through the empty house, delighted by all the space, and Xander scooped him up, holding him high. "This is our home, Danny boy," he said. "Yours and Mama's and mine." "What do you think?" "Big," Daniel said, his favorite word at the moment, and they all laughed. In the spring of 1882, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter, Emma Sarah Blake, was born in December of that year, a week before Christmas. She was small and delicate, with Xander's dark hair and Natalie's green eyes, and she was adored from the moment she entered the world, particularly by her big brother, who wanted to hold her constantly. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Xander still worked at the Double Bar Ranch, but he also began building up their own small herd of cattle. Natalie managed their household, took care of the children, and sold eggs and butter in town to bring in a bit of extra money. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. But happiness, Natalie had learned, did not mean the absence of storms. It meant having someone to weather them with. In the summer of 1884, when Daniel was nearly 5 and Emma was 18 months old, a drought hit Montana territory. The grass turned brown and brittle, the creek on their property dried to a trickle, and the cattle began to suffer. Xander worked longer hours, trying to move the cattle to better grazing land, trying to find water sources that had not dried up. Money grew tight as they had to buy feed for the animals, and Natalie began taking in sewing and laundry again to help make ends meet. The stress wore on both of them. Xander was exhausted and worried, and Natalie felt her old temper rising as she watched her husband work himself to the bone, and their carefully built life seemed to crumble. One evening in late August, after Xander had been gone for 3 days straight, camping with the cattle in a far pasture, he came home to find Natalie in tears at the kitchen table, a pile of unpaid bills in front of her. "We cannot do this," she said, not even looking up when he came in. "We cannot keep going like this. You are killing yourself and we are still falling behind." "It is just until the drought breaks," Xander said, but even he sounded defeated. "Once the rain comes, the grass will grow again and everything will be fine." "And what if the rain does not come? What if we lose everything we have worked for?" Natalie looked up at him and he could see the fear in her eyes. "What if we have to go back to having nothing?" Xander sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "I do not know," he admitted, "but we will figure it out. We always do." "I am tired of figuring it out," Natalie said, and her temper flared. "I am tired of worrying about money, about the cattle, about whether we will have enough to get through the winter. I am tired of this constant struggle. What do you want me to do?" Xander asked, and there was an edge to his voice now. "Sell the land, go back to working for someone else and living in a 2-room shack. I am doing the best I can, Natalie." "I know you are," Natalie said, her anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. "I know, I am sorry, I am just scared." Xander reached across the table and took her hand. "I am scared too, but we are in this together, remember? We weather every storm as one. That is what I promised you, and I meant it." "I remember," Natalie whispered. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Then Xander said, "I have an idea. It is risky, but it might work. Mr. Cartwright is looking to sell off part of his herd before the drought gets worse. If we can scrape together enough money to buy some of his cattle at a discount, we could sell them in the spring when prices will be higher. It is a gamble, but if it pays off, it would give us enough cushion to get through the next few years." "Where would we get the money?" Natalie asked. "We have some savings, and I could ask my uncle for a loan. He has always said he would help if we needed it." Xander squeezed her hand. "What do you think?" "I think it is risky," Natalie said honestly, "but I also think you are good at this, at raising cattle and managing land. If anyone can make it work, you can. So yes, let us try." Xander's gamble paid off. He bought a dozen head of cattle from Mr. Cartwright at a significant discount, and when he sold them the following spring, the profit was enough to pay off their debts, repay his uncle, and put a comfortable sum in the bank. The drought finally broke that spring, the rains returning and turning the brown land green again. By the fall of 1885, they were on solid footing again. Natalie was pregnant with their 3rd child, due in the spring, and Daniel was starting lessons at the small schoolhouse in Montana City. Emma was a bright, talkative 3-year-old who followed her older brother everywhere and drove him to distraction and delight in equal measure. Their 3rd child, a boy they named Thomas William Blake after Xander's uncle and Natalie's grandfather, was born in April of 1886. He was the easiest of their 3 children, a placid, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world from his mother's arms. As the years passed, their family and their ranch grew. Xander was able to buy another 20 acres of land adjacent to their property. They built a larger barn and expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Daniel grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved working with his father on the ranch. Emma was lively and independent, with a quick temper that reminded everyone of her mother. And Tommy was gentle and thoughtful, happiest when he was reading or helping his mother in the garden. In the summer of 1892, when Natalie was 35 and Xander was nearly 40, they sat on the porch of their home one evening, watching their children play in the yard. Daniel, now 13, was teaching 10-year-old Emma how to rope a fence post. Tommy, at 6, was chasing chickens, his laughter ringing clear in the evening air. "Can you believe this is our life?" Natalie asked, leaning against Xander's shoulder. "Sometimes I still cannot," Xander admitted. "I think about that day in the saloon when you threw a bottle at Randy Peterson, and I wonder what would have happened if I had not walked in when I did." "You would have found me eventually," Natalie said confidently. "I believe that. I think we were meant to find each other." "I think so too," Xander said, wrapping his arm around her. "You were right, you know. You did warn me about your terrible temper." Natalie laughed. "And you laughed and said we would weather every storm as one, and we have not we? We have weathered every single storm." "We have," Xander agreed, "and we will continue to. Whatever comes, we face it together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Natalie thought about everything they had been through, the grief and loss she had carried when they met, the struggles of their early marriage, the financial hardships, the joys and challenges of raising children. Through it all, Xander had been her rock, steady and patient and unfailingly kind. And she had learned to temper her fire with his calm, to channel her passion into building rather than burning. "I love you," she said quietly, "more now than even on the day we married." "I love you too," Xander replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Daniel met a girl from town, a sweet, shy young woman named Clara, and married her when he was 20. They built a small house on the far end of the property, and Daniel became a full partner in the ranch. Emma, true to her independent spirit, decided she wanted to be a teacher. She attended the normal school in Helena and returned to Montana City to teach at the schoolhouse where she had once been a student. Tommy, the dreamer of the family, surprised everyone by wanting to study law. With his parents' support, he left for college in the East when he was 18. Natalie and Xander became grandparents in 1899, when Daniel and Clara welcomed a daughter they named Natalie Rose, after her grandmother. The joy of holding her granddaughter brought tears to Natalie's eyes and made her think of her own mother, gone so many years now but never forgotten. By the turn of the century, Xander and Natalie were in their 40s, their children grown, their ranch prosperous. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Xander's Uncle Thomas passed away in 1897, leaving the livery stable to Xander, who sold it rather than try to manage both businesses. Mrs. Hadley died peacefully in her sleep in 1901, and Natalie mourned the woman who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. But through all the losses and all the challenges, Xander and Natalie remained steadfast in their love for each other. They still argued sometimes. Natalie's temper had not disappeared with age, and there were days when she railed against the unfairness of life, the hardships they faced. But Xander was always there, steady and calm, reminding her that they were in it together. In the summer of 1908, when they had been married for 30 years, their children threw them an anniversary celebration at the ranch. Daniel and Clara were there with their 4 children. Emma, still unmarried but happy in her work, came from town. Tommy came home from Butte, where he had established a successful law practice, bringing with him the woman he had been courting, a spirited young lawyer named Catherine. They gathered around the long table in the dining room, 3 generations of family, and Xander stood to offer a toast. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite the gray in his hair. I met a woman in a saloon who had just knocked out a drunk with a bottle. She warned me she had a terrible temper, and I told her we would weather every storm as one. He looked at Natalie, and his eyes were warm with love. We have weathered storms I never could have imagined, droughts and debts and losses that broke my heart. But we weathered them together, and that has made all the difference. Natalie, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in all things. Here is to 30 more years. To 30 more years, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Natalie stood and kissed her husband, not caring that their children and grandchildren were watching. I love you, she said. Thank you for laughing when I warned you about my temper. Thank you for seeing the best in me when I could not see it in myself. Thank you for being exactly what I needed, even when I did not know I needed it. Always, Xander said simply, and it was all the promise she needed. They did not get 30 more years. In the winter of 1915, Xander caught pneumonia while helping to rescue cattle trapped in a blizzard. He fought the illness for 2 weeks, but his lungs had been weakened by years of hard work and exposure to the elements. He died on a cold February morning with Natalie holding his hand, and their children gathered around. Natalie felt her world shatter. The man who had been her rock, her steady presence through nearly 40 years of storms, was gone. She raged against it, her temper flaring hot and furious. It was not fair. They were supposed to grow old together, to watch their grandchildren grow up, to sit on the porch in their twilight years and remember all they had been through. But even in her grief, she could hear Xander's voice in her head, calm and steady. We weather every storm as one. He might be gone, but she was not alone. She had their children, their grandchildren, the ranch they had built together. She had a lifetime of memories, of laughter and love and partnership, and she had the knowledge that she had been truly, deeply loved. Natalie lived another 12 years, active and engaged despite her age. She helped Daniel run the ranch, doted on her growing collection of grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She attended Emma's wedding when her daughter finally married at the age of 45, a widower with 3 children who needed a mother. She was there when Tommy was elected to the Montana state legislature, proud of the man her gentle son had become. She told stories about their grandfather to the grandchildren who had never met him, about his patience and kindness, about how he had believed in her when she had not believed in herself. She showed them the locket he had given her on their first Christmas, still worn around her neck, containing photographs of them both now, faded but still clear. In the spring of 1927, Natalie died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70, in the house Xander had built for her 46 years earlier. She was buried next to him on a hill overlooking their ranch, and on her headstone, their children had inscribed the words that had defined their marriage. We weathered every storm as one. Daniel stood at his mother's grave after the funeral, his own hair now gray, his children and grandchildren around him. She loved him so much, he said quietly. Even after he was gone, you could see it in everything she did. And he loved her, Emma added, tears streaming down her face. I remember how he used to look at her, like she was the most amazing thing he had ever seen, even when she was yelling at him about something. That is what love looks like, Tommy said, his arm around his wife Catherine. Not perfect, not easy, but constant. They were partners in the truest sense of the word. They stood together on that hillside, 3 generations of a family that existed because a hot-headed young woman with a terrible temper had met a patient young man with a steady heart. And together, They had built something that would last far beyond their own lives. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The small house that Natalie and Xander had lived in when they first married still stood on the double-bar ranch property, preserved as a reminder of where they had started. The larger house they built remained the heart of the family ranch, expanded and updated over the years, but still recognizably the home that Xander had built with his own hands. And on summer evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echoes of laughter, of a man's calm voice and a woman's passionate reply, of children playing and a life fully lived. You could almost see them, sitting on the porch together, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, weathering every storm as one, just as they had promised. Their love story became family legend, passed down through the generations. Great-grandchildren who never met them knew their story, knew about the terrible temper and the steady patience, about the storms they weathered and the life they built. It became a standard to aspire to, a reminder that love was not about perfection but about partnership, about choosing each other every day, about facing whatever came with courage and commitment. And so the legacy of Natalie and Xander Blake lived on, not just in the ranch that bore their name or the descendants who carried their blood, but in the example they set of what it meant to truly love someone, temper and all, through every storm that life could bring. They had faced those storms together, as one, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged in hardship and joy, and sealed with a promise that was kept every single day of their lives. Then we'll weather every storm as one.